Next, we've got Alexander Rubin. He's going to be talking about some pretty cool MySQL and PostgreSQL hacking techniques. One other quick bit of bookkeeping. If you were waiting on a t-shirt, we do have those available out front now. For anyone who didn't buy them ahead of time, you can go get them for 20 bucks. And now we've got Alexander.
Thank you. Let me set it up. All right, sounds good. This is my first time speaking at a theater. So I don't know if it's normal that I cannot see anyone because of the lights. I probably use my hat. All right, thank you. All right, cool. So my name is Alex. I am I'm principal database engineer at Amazon Web Services. And I will be talking today about databases and specific security problem, which is called confused deputy problem. And we'll talk about how this will apply to the databases. A little bit about me. I have been working with MySQL. My background is MySQL consulting pretty much. I started 2006, starting working for MySQL AB, the company behind MySQL. I was doing consulting there, and my security interest started as a hobby. About 4 years ago, I started playing capture the flag games and developed lots of interest into security, into red teaming. And I joined Amazon Web Services about 2 years ago, and I switched to doing security. I created what we called RDS Red Team, and currently leading that team at Amazon Web Services. So we're working with a relational database as a service, which make it easier for customers to start and manage their relational databases. So what is confused deputy problem? So confused deputy, the deputy here is a computer program. So it's a computer program that have a number of privileges, high privilege program, and another program trick that program, that high privilege program, into doing something. Usually that's basically a privilege escalation. And what I will do first, I will show you how this can look at Linux. And then we will talk about the databases and see how it can apply to MySQL. So let's say that I'm a system administrator, and I wanted to fix a security problem. So I realized that this unprivileged user, EC2 user on my EC2 instance, has some files owned by root. And I created this simple cron job to fix this. And basically every minute, it will end, putting it back to what it should be, unprivileged user, EC2 user. Right? So what can go wrong here? And to demonstrate that, I recorded a quick video, what may happen. So here on one side, I have a root access, and I have this cron job. I am creating, by mistake, I'm creating a user in the home directory, and this user will be owned by root. And then my cron job will start in a minute, and we'll fix that, right? Because we don't want to have files in a home directory of unprivileged user owned by root, because in this case, user will not be able to do anything with that, right? So in a second, here we go. So it's fixed, right? And then we have this unprivileged user, and unprivileged user can actually confuse the cron job making bad stuff. So I can create here a symlink to etc password. So I can create a symlink in any directory which will point to any file, even if obviously, if I'm not owner of that file, right? So then, in a minute, the cron job will run, and what will happen is that this chown command will follow the symlink and change the password file to my unprivileged user. So an attacker, a bad actor on that side, on the unprivileged side, will be able to trick the privileged program, the cron job, into doing something to obtain an additional privilege, obtain a privilege escalation. So now it is owned by EC2 user, and I can, as a EC2 user, I can edit etc password. I will create another root user, or I can simply change my ID to be root. So this is how this malicious user, unprivileged user, got the privilege escalation. Right, so this is the example of confused deputy problem for the databases. So let's go next. So let's talk about the databases. And in this case, I will be presenting a sample architecture for MySQL. In this architecture, this is completely fictional scenario, right? So in this architecture, we have some health care records service, software as a service. And they have their main application, which is highly privileged and highly protected. And they also have a WordPress site. They just wanted to tell about themselves, right? So there's nothing interesting here. And then what happens, our bad actor found a way through the SQL injection in some of the WordPress website modules, for example, and was able to get into the WordPress site. But there's nothing interesting here. So the WordPress database is pretty much the web pages. So even if, and this user, MySQL user, is read-only. So there is nothing interesting there. But what the attacker really wants to do is to get into the health records database, where there's a PHI information, health records, and stuff like that. So the question is, how can an attacker potentially do that? So to answer this question, we need to look inside the database. So as a privileged user, I can see all the users in my database. And what I can see here is that I have an admin user, like a root user on Linux. I have two dedicated users. One user is for the WordPress database, and the second user is for the healthcare service. So my application has basically two applications here, right? So the first application uses the WordPress user, and the second application uses the health data service user. So I also see this. There is a monitor user. So what is this monitor user? So to answer this question, we need to look into the actual permissions. So we can see that the WordPress user only have privileges to the WordPress database and nothing else. And similarly, health data service user has privileges on the health data service database. But the monitoring user, which is used for performance monitoring usually, has a global select. But in addition to that, it has the it can execute the stored procedures and can execute, can do a function call. So now the question is, can a bad actor confuse this monitoring solution that is using this monitor user to give a WordPress user privilege escalation to read the healthcare system? So if we are the core WordPress user, we are unable to read the MySQL.user. MySQL.user is basically a table which stores both usernames and passwords. So think about this as both etc password and etc shadow. If you have an access to that table, you will have a username and you will also have an access to hash of the password. But a WordPress user has no ability, has no way it can read from that table. At the same time, the monitor user, because it has a global select, can read that. And it can also read this authentication string, which is actually a hash of the password. So you may be wondering what this monitor user is used for and what this database performance monitoring system do. Right? Typically in the database world, we use database monitoring systems to collect database metrics, to collect slow queries, and to actually generate the explain plans. So explain plan is the way to see why this query is slow, what this query is doing. So typically database administrator, again, review the database metrics and collect the slow queries, and a typical database administrator job is to actually run the explain plan and see what this query is doing and understand how to optimize that. And some of the monitoring systems, performance monitoring systems, they are doing that for you. So they are displaying the queries, the slow queries, and they also execute the explain plan. They execute the explain command on the query. So it will be very handy for database administrator to use that because they see it on a single page. So to generate explain plan, what either DBA or this performance monitoring system will do is to take the slow query and rerun this slow query with the explain plan. So we do explain, and then we can see something in the MySQL world, something like here, right? So it's using index, it's using scan this number of rows, something. But the question is, will it re-execute the select, right? It will not re-execute the select because it's only need to take the statistics, right? Right? Actually, in some cases, it will. And this is the worst part. And this is the part where MySQL actually didn't do a very good job on security. There was a blog post a couple years ago written by Percona, the company that's doing MySQL consulting. And what it actually describes is that there are certain conditions where MySQL explain plan will need to execute the part of the query. So in the database world, we have this select query, but we also have this notion of subquery. And a subquery is a way to execute part of the query, basically materialize, create a temporary table as a result of the subquery. So to generate the good explain plan, MySQL will need to do this. So if there is a subquery, it needs to calculate the number of rows in this subquery to generate the right explain plan. So to do that, it will materialize and re-execute this query. So this is what happens here. We have a subquery, which is doing sleep. And when we run the explain plan, what we see that this is run more than an hour because it's sleeping, it's waiting until this part, the select sleep part, will be materialized. So now we know what to do. A bad actor knows what to do. So how do we escalate our privilege? How do we use this confused deputy problem to escalate our privilege? This database, in the WordPress database, this user can create tables, functions, stored procedures, anything. So we'll start with creating this function, which is called exploit. And this function will be using this, again, database-specific thing, which is called SQL security. So SQL security works as, I need to talk about this in this slide, though. So what SQL security is, it basically allows to run with the privilege of a specific user. So with this example, it will run normally. Whoever runs this function will, the privileges of that user will be applied here. So what this function will do, it will check what is the current user, meaning the user that is running it. If it's any user except for the monitor user, which is sleep, because we'll need to generate a slow query. However, if this user is monitor, we will select the authentication string from MySQL user. Right, but the monitoring user has global select. So monitoring user, if monitoring user will rerun this query, will be able to retrieve the password. But the question is, how do we pass the password back? So again, we have the ability to specify this definer and SQL security clause in the database. So the definer part works like a suite bit on Linux. So if you run this function, a privileged user run this function, it will still be run in the context of whatever user will be specified as a definer. Definer is sort of owner of the file. So now we can create another function which will save, meaning insert into a table, whatever we'll pass. And this function will be run with the privilege of WordPress user. So inside of that function, we have the ability to actually do the write into the database that is controlled by attacker. So now we can create this proof of concept here. Again, we will use this SQL security invoker, so it will run in the context of user who invoked the function, basically who did the select. Then inside of that, we will select the password, put it in a variable, and then use another function, pass the variable into that function. And that function, in turn, will be running in the context of our user, which will be able to write to the database. So my monitor user actually doesn't have any ability to write. But because we're using this function, which has the definer part, we will be able to write. So this is the trick. We can now select, obtain the password, and save it into the table that is controlled by an attacker. So I have created this demo, and in this demo, I have everything here, everything set up, my two functions, right? And then I'm running from that corp WordPress user, because this is the user that attacker got. And then I have prepared this table to materialize my password into, right? And then the next thing, what I will do is I will generate the slow query. I will make it slow and will make the subquery here, and I will simply do select WordPress exploit. Right, this is slow query. It will run in what, 30 seconds, right? 30 seconds. Now, a DBA or even the monitoring system will pick this query up and will need to run the explain because it's slow query. So the DBA, let's say DBA runs this, and DBA doesn't understand what happened, right? It's not a slow query now. So now, but then now the attacker will select from the P, here's our password. So we have obtained the hash of the more privileged user. So now the question is what we will do with this, right? So this is our monitoring user. And our monitoring user has much more interesting stuff. It's a obviously privilege escalation. But the question is, how do I log in, right? It's a hash of the password. So my Hashcat instance with 8 GPU cores, and we'll run the hash and try to use XT. Actually brute force that password. So let's see what will happen, right? So this is my password. I removed the star from the beginning because it's MySQL specific, and then put it into a file and then run the hashcat. So let's see how long it will take. Wow, it's done. So the password is pass, P-A-S-S. That's the password of the monitoring user, right? And the reason why is people never pay attention into securing this, users for the monitoring system, right? So they think that this is unprivileged user, nothing more than that. It's just for monitoring, right? So in this example, I was able to get the privilege escalation, retrieve the password, take the hash of the password, and hack the password. So now an attacker is able to use that to connect to the database and pretty much download the whole health service database, including PHI, patient name, whatever it is, right? So recap. So what we did is, this is a database specific. We use the confused deputy problem and apply it to the database. And we use MySQL as an example. So MySQL explain plan can actually execute the statement, and it should not. And another problem that I have demonstrated here is that monitoring user has global select and also execute privilege. If the monitoring user don't have execute privilege, then this whole attack will not be possible. So the result, we got monitoring user password hash. It's simple password, easy to crack, and an attacker can connect as monitoring user now, and because monitoring user has a global select, it can download the whole database and start selling it at whatever. All right, so this is the picture. It's a fictional scenario, an SQL injection to the low privileged database, a database that has nothing in it, pretty much, going to the MySQL, allow an attacker to actually switch to the database, use the confused deputy problem to switch to the database and download the health record database. What about Postgres? I don't have a proof of concept for Postgres yet. That's much more complicated, but still possible. When I will have a proof of concept on the next conference, I will do a demo for Postgres as well. And that's all what I wanted to talk about today. Thank you very much. Uh, 2 minutes for questions. Yes. Right. So basically, the questions, there are 2 questions here, right? Is it really a bug in MySQL? It's debatable if it's bug or not. We think that this is bug. I personally think it's bug. MySQL developers don't think that's a bug. So technically, it's a design choice. But from the security perspective, it's very bad. Other databases may also be susceptible to that. There are certain conditions, then I haven't talked about that, but there are certain conditions where PostgreSQL actually execute the query, even if you just do explain. So in both MySQL and PostgreSQL, there's explain and there's explain analyze. When you run explain analyze, it is actually executing the query. The normal explain should not, but this is what it is, right? So both MySQL and PostgreSQL potentially susceptible for that. So to fix that, you need to be super careful of what user is running the select queries and who is running the explain plans and whatever privileges you have on that user that is re-executing the custom query pretty much. Other questions? All right, thank you very much.